And hello, everyone. Welcome to the Social Justice Forum. I am your host, Daren, Jaime. We thank you for joining us. If you're asking the question, what is this show all about? We bring you a forum discussing the deeper issues and the understanding the inequities that so many communities face. Things such as systemic inequality to social problems. Our guests, they provide multiple perspectives and insights, helping us better understand and address these challenges. We invite you to stay connected to us. The Social Justice Forum starts now. And we are back. While the sport promises prestige, fame, and fortune, many college football athletes face a starkly different reality. Injuries, financial instability, and a devalued education weigh heavily on young players, particularly black athletes, who are disproportionately represented on the field. Our next guest is a scholar, shining a light on the ways these athletes navigate the exploitive systems that she says shapes their lives. Joining us now is the anthropologist and author of Tackling the Everyday, Dr. Tracie Canada. And Dr. Canada, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. I want to say you take an interesting perspective here when you look at college football, and one that some may, well, we'll get to it. We'll talk about what your critics say, but let's talk about your perspective, really, as when you look at the college football game, you say there's a lot of issues here.
Yeah, I do think that there are a ton of issues in college football. But I think that there's a reason why it's happening, right? Like there are a lot of people that are interested in it. There are a lot of people who like to play. There's a very particular affinity to the sport itself. And so it makes sense why it's so popular, why there's so many participants, why we're so invested in it. But I think that when we look at the college level, there are a ton of issues, right? There's a lot of issues around who gets paid and who doesn't, around whose labor is being used and whose labor is not, around the positions and who ends up in certain positions, certain playing positions on the field, in the type of education that these football players actually receive when compared to other students on campus, when thinking about the loads of injuries that can come from this, not just concussions, but other bodily, like more everyday type issues that come up from playing a sport like this, right? The dynamics between the coaches and the players, the dynamics between the players and the universities, right? There's so many dynamics that come up here that are worthy of study and are interesting to me, at least. But I think that it tells us a lot about this country that we live in. And so that's why I'm very much interested in what sports and specifically football can tell us.
So let's give some context here. You've done some research, not some, a lot of research on this particular area. I would never say some. I apologize for that, because anybody who's got a doctorate, Ph.D., and I'm almost there. I know what that's like, so apologies on the
You
some.
know, yeah.
You've done a lot of research, right, in this particular area. But you come to some pretty interesting conclusions. And so I want to get to some of the conclusions that you reach and have a discussion about them. I mean, one of the things is that you talk about the myth of the football family that is just a myth and it's not really a reality.
Yeah, so to kind of explain a little bit about what you were bringing up there too, I'm an anthropologist, and the work that I do is ethnographic, which means that I spend immersive time with the people that I write about and the people that I'm interested in, because I want to learn from them about their own experiences, about the ways that they're theorizing their own lives, about what they see, about what they think, about what they're interested in. And so for the work that I do, that means, and has meant over the past almost decade, of spending a lot of time with Black college football players and learning from them, spending time with them in football related spaces, also athletic, just like more general athletic spaces, academic spaces, and more like everyday spaces, right? So when you are with somebody in their every day, for at least a year, you learn a lot about what's going on with them. And then you can also you have ideas about the ways that their individual experiences might connect to other people that you see, right? So then it's no longer anecdotal. Their individual experiences relate to systemic issues or systemic changes, how individuals and structures work together, right? So like that's the type of work that I'm doing to try to better understand the experiences of Black college football players, to then make these larger statements about ideas of kinship, which is what you're asking about now, ideas of care, how race factors in, how gender factors in, labor, right? Like all these bigger issues. So one of the things that I was very much interested in while I was doing research is this idea of the football family, because it's something that's repeated over and over again, right? Like that's a narrative that we hear a lot. Individual teams will use this type of phrasing. The NFL uses it at lots of different instances. And individual teams also have like particular ways that they will talk about their own football family, right? And then the way that I talk about it in the book is certain hashtags. So you'll see college teams post on social media with a hashtag that kind of invokes this idea of a family, right? But coaches use this type of language all of the time. And what I was noticing while I was there is that this is a very particular type of family, right? This family is one that has the head coach as the almost father, right? So it's also patriarchal because of the way that the father slash coach factors into this. You have the assistant coaches who act in different ways at different times, sometimes as fathers, sometimes as brothers, sometimes as mothers, right? Like if we think of a stereotypical heteropatriarchal family. And then we have the players themselves who are like the sons, right? But the way that these dynamics and these relationships between the different people in this family work is that this is a family that is built on trying to get a ton of people invested and caring for one another and trusting in one another, because this football family, this team, needs to win, right? Like college football depends on winning. That's how coaches get paid. That's how you keep seeing them on TV. That's how they stay in the conferences that they're in. That's how they sell tickets, right? Like all of this is based on winning. And so this idea of the family is trying to tap into something that we all can relate to in some way or another, right? Like, but if we make it a family that is then based on whether or not you're able to play, and what can you do for us now, and what did you do for us yesterday, and what can you do for us tomorrow on the field, right? Like that's a pretty, in the way that I think about it, that's a pretty exploitative tactic to say, we are caring for you and we're going to call you family because we want you to produce for us. We want you to play for us. We want you to be successful for us, because then we can make some money off of what it is that you're doing. And so I'm really critical of this idea of the football family because it's a top-down approach. It's something that coaches use a lot to try to get players on board. It's something that they use in recruiting too. They'll try to talk about the ways that they form this family, this loving family. But there's so many ways that this is often disrupted. And at least one of the big ones that happens at the end of every season is when these coaches leave to go to other universities, right? So what's happening with this football family, this family that you've recruited players to, that's the narrative that you use to try to get people on board. And then just at the drop of a hat, because you get a better offer at a different school, the head coach will just leave. Sometimes we'll take some assistant coaches with them. And then that whole family is disrupted. And so I don't necessarily think that this is a genuine quote unquote family. But I think that it has particular motivations in mind, and usually it's about money.
And so what do you say to the critics who say, listen, you know what, that's true, you've got some great points there, but I've had character development. I've developed a strong bond of brothers. We either, after we graduate or, we may not make it to the NFL, but yet and still that we have become family through this. And if it wasn't for football, I think about my own sports. I've got some brothers that, that I consider because I played sports, right? But
Yeah.
and that brotherhood has been built. So what do you say to the critic that says, hey, you know what? I have gained family out of this, or if I've come from a broken family, this is the first time I've been taught family values, love, the whole 9 yards. Your response would be?
Yeah, so I have a response to that in the book that says that what players are doing is actually different than what administrators and coaches are doing, right? And I actually use the language that you just brought up because that's the way that players talk about it, right? Like they talk about a brotherhood. They don't necessarily talk about a football family. I argue that the football family dynamic comes from coaches and administrators. It comes from up top. But players themselves will talk about creating brothers, right? Like that type of relationship that they have with each other that comes from, and the way that I talk about it in the book, is that it comes from them relating to one another on a completely different level that other people just can't understand, right? Like, especially in college, like that's a pretty unique experience to say, I've played football for X amount of years. I was recruited. I'm now at this like big time college. All these eyes are on me. I'm popular on my college campus. I'm on TV every Saturday. I live in a particular body that requires that I eat something, like eat particular things, sleep a certain amount, work out a certain amount, right? Like it's a long day. We have these like wild practices that start really early and sometimes end really late. I have to deal with going to class, right? Like this is a very particular experience to play college football. And on top of that, because I work specifically work with and write specifically about Black college football players, there's the added dynamic of like what it means to be a young Black man living in a particular body that's valued for football, but then is also often stigmatized in the world outside of it, right? So the way that I analyze it is to say that the football family comes from top down, but the brotherhood is what the players themselves create with each other because of this very unique experience, right? And that's the thing that ties them during the time that they're in college, and then you see it blossom, and then they keep it going once they've graduated, right? It's the group chats of people who have graduated 10, 20 years before, but they keep in touch that way, right? It's the fact that you see them in each other's weddings as groomsmen. They are godfathers to each other's kids once they have kids, right? It's that relationship that they are creating for themselves that does come from football, right? Like they meet each other in football. They can relate because of this pretty extreme experience. But this is something that they're fostering themselves despite almost the football family that is being impressed upon them by administrators and coaches.
Right. I want to talk about one other topic that you bring of light, and that is athletic exploitation, the exploitation of the athletic field, if you say the football field, and then yet and still the devaluing of education. And when you look at the exploitation, you talk about the devaluation, how do you arrive at this conclusion?
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting dynamic that really comes from this idea of the student athlete, right? Like if you read anything that I've written outside of the book or even in the book too, I don't use the language of the quote unquote student athlete because I think that it's a fallacy to say that they are student dash athletes, right? There's something going on here by tying higher education to athletics, right? And the US is the only place that does that. So we have a very unique athletic system, specifically through college sports, that ties these two things together, right? But if we look at what happens when a football player is recruited to come play at a university in the Power 5 or 4, depending on how we're talking about it now, because that's where I focus my attention for my research, right? If we look at what's happening in the everyday of a football player, so much time is spent on football, and there are ways that academics are put in the background to foreground football and sport itself, right? And I only talk about football, but there are other sports that the exact same dynamic happens, right? So when you have a game on the weekends, but you need to leave you have a game on Saturday, but you need to leave your college campus on Wednesday or Thursday in order to make it to where you're going and to prepare, right? Like that means that you are missing classes. That means that you have to make up that work by yourself. That means that you're not in a class with other students to learn from the professor at the same time, right? If you have a very particular schedule, that means that you have practice every day at whatever time, and it lasts however many hours, which means that there are certain classes on that college campus that you just don't have access to. That might limit what classes you can take. That might limit the order in which you take your classes. That might also limit the majors that you have access to, right? Like because some majors might have labs that meet at a certain time and you have to be there, but that interferes with football. That class might have some type of extracurricular component, right, that happens outside of the classroom, but you can't participate because you're in season or because it just interferes with other activities that football has said that you need to attend, and those come first, right? You don't have the same opportunity to network, to intern, to even participate in potentially other activities that you might be interested in because of the time that's necessary for football, right? Like if a team is going to make it to a bowl game, then they're on campus way past other students who have already left for winter break, right? If you are a football player, then you come back for summer, you come back during the summer before the fall semester, right? So you're coming back earlier. You're usually on campus for a lot of the summer. So that means that you can't have a full summer long internship, right? There are all of these ways that players are having to put football first because that's what they've been recruited to do. And academics are going to factor in, right? Like they are still in classes. Usually they do still graduate, not at the same rates. And actually Black college football players have the lowest graduation rates of any college athlete on campus. So they do usually graduate, but what does this degree look like and how does it compare to the degree that other students on that campus get, right? And so I do think that there is something going on here that we need to really think about of like what type of education are we providing for the football players that come in? Because the idea, and as you said, the way that I write about it, like this myth is that you get both, right? Like you are able to participate fully in both. And I just don't think that that's true. But I would prefer that we do a much better job of making sure that they get almost the exact same experience in the classroom and then are also just able to play football at the same time.
I think there's a conversation to be had, because when you think about athletes, as I've heard you say, I'll go back on one thing that you mentioned. You said, hey, well, the guy leaves on Wednesday and they've got a game on Friday. Well,
Hmm.
in a lot of our Power 5 schools, a lot of those major institutions, they do have study hall. And they do have the
Hmm.
opportunity to be able to have tutors. There are
Hmm.
academic breakouts that allow students to actually participate fully in a
Hmm.
lot of these areas where coaches are really like, hey, we want to emphasize academics over athletics. You do see that there's this taking care of the student, because they do, in a lot of places, do put the student above the athlete. And I know that there's examples on both sides of the coin where you can say it didn't really work like that. But what do you say to those persons? Because there is some emphasis on, not some, a huge emphasis in a lot of institutions, particularly Division I institutions, that put an emphasis to make sure that a student is still academically eligible.
Yeah, they still definitely are academically eligible, right? Because they can't play unless they're academically eligible. So there's a lot that goes in to make sure that they are still eligible. But the argument that I'm trying to make is that it is a different experience if most of your classes or most of the work that you're doing for your classes takes place in study hall or with a tutor rather than with the professor, right? Rather than with your classmates, rather than in real time participation with everyone else in that classroom setting, right? If your class meets Tuesday, Thursday every week during the afternoon, right? Then, and if you happen to miss, I don't know, 4 of those Thursday afternoon sessions because of because of what your travel schedule is that season, then that means that you're missing 4 in-class sessions, right? And that could add up to about almost 8 hours, right? Like 6 hours at least of class time that you are missing, that you have to either fill in by yourself, you have to find it somewhere else. It's a tutor that's filling in for you. It's somebody that works in athletics that's helping you catch up, right? But that's not class. That's not time in class with your classmates, and that's not time in class with your professor. And so it's not to say that they are not receiving an education, right? Because they are, but it's not the same type of education. It's not the same experience that other students on campus are receiving. And I think that that is something that we need to look at, right? Because what are they getting? What are they being promised? And then what are they getting? I think there is a disconnect there that really needs to be studied.
Yeah, I got to move on real quickly, and I got about 2 seconds. Well, not 2 seconds, but 1 minute, 1 minute and a half. I could ask my producer to extend the segment. We talked a little bit earlier about this, but we could go. I think we could go a few more minutes here. I'm going to ask you to address the issue of the role of white parents, because we're hearing a lot more white parents, or you allude that a lot more white parents are actually pulling their kids from football.
Yeah, so that's work that I'm going to be starting soon. That's not necessarily what I talk about in the book, but I do think that there's a really interesting dynamic that's going on now that was written about a couple of years ago, of this idea of quote unquote white flight from football. Given the intense and like kind of at the time new information around concussions. So the way that it was being written about in all these major news outlets was to say that white middle class parents, and some black middle class parents too, were pulling their kids out from the lower levels of football because of the fears of the dangers, right? Like the concussion dangers, the brain injuries, but also the bodily injuries, right? To say that tackle football is just too dangerous, and so they didn't want their kids to play. And the part of that that's really interesting to me, given what I study, which is I work with black college football players, right, is to say that that then is going to change the pipeline of who's playing when they're younger, which then eventually will change who plays when they're in college, and then could potentially change what the NFL looks like. And so that's what I'm interested in, right? But a lot of this was tied to this idea of injury, right? Of this being just too dangerous for some people to be able to play. But then there are other kids who, what are the other opportunities? Where else will they go? What else could they participate in? And that is also an interesting dynamic that I'm hoping to study soon, actually.
Yeah. So, as you've done your research on black college football, give us a little bit more about some of the universities and people that you've actually talked to really reach your to reach your conclusions on the black college football.
Yeah, so because of the type of work that I do, all of the schools, all of the people they remain anonymous, right? So, but I can say that I have worked in Power 5, Power 4, depending on how you want to frame it. When I was doing the research, it was still Power 5. Power 4, Power 5 institutions, and HBCUs, right? Because I was very interested in what was going on across, if there was something different going on. And the conclusions that I've come to is that the system itself, the arguments that I make hold across the system, right? It doesn't matter if it's an HBCU, it doesn't matter if it's a historically white institution like the ones that end up in the Power 5. Everything is functioning at the same level and they're all working the same way because there is still this dynamic of who is playing and who's getting paid, who is, in the way that I talk about it, who's being exploited and who's not, who has the ability to move in a way that other people don't, right? Who is getting sometimes the short end of the stick. And usually it is players every single time, no matter what type of institution they're at. So having this, having data from different types of universities also helps me make these arguments.
Yeah, I think that when you look at universities as a whole, I think that you can say that when you look at, let's go back, college football as a whole, you can say between the NCAA and universities, they make a lot of money.
So
The
much
athlete,
money.
the athlete at the end of the day, they're the ones they're absolutely on the short end of the stick. I do also believe that there are universities that actually do justice academically for their students because there is a vast difference. If you're at HBCU, there's going to be a vast difference between an HBCU and a Power 5, Power 4. You're going to have a plethora of resources that are there. But then you look at a person like Deion Sanders, who's taken Jackson State, and they had no resources. Then you get him at Colorado, and now you've got a whole team that has a 3.0 GPA. I actually posted about that not too long ago. That the highest GPA actually there because the resources are there, and there's a commitment to education, which a lot of football programs actually do have. Before we break it down a little bit. If there's some things that you would like to see and recommendations, how would you recommend that we can fix the exploitation and the devaluation of black athletes, black football
Yeah, so I do
athletes?
think that I think there's lots of ways that we can look at this, right? Like, so one, NIL wasn't a thing when I was doing the research that I was doing, right? Like I was, this
Huge,
immersive
yeah.
work was done in 2017-18. So NIL is a step in the right direction, right? But actually NIL just gives back rights to athletes on college campuses that everyone else already had. So we're going in the right direction, but it's definitely not enough, I don't think. I think that these talks about allowing athletes to unionize, I think is really important. I think the talks about athletes across universities networking and talking to each other and figuring out what's happening on their individual campuses to then potentially collaborate, I think is important. All of these conversations and lawsuits right now happening, the settlements with the NCAA, a lot of them around revenue sharing, I think is also a step in the right direction because that is redirecting where funds are going, right? Like now athletes will be better partners in this. I think that these conversations around the transfer portal are also important because that means that athletes can move their labor around, right? Like there is a particular value that they have. And so now they have more agency in that decision of whether or not they want to stay. But I also think that conversations around, like, as an example, like insurance for athletes past the time that they graduate, so that if they incur any injury in school, then they can still take care of themselves once they've graduated, right? Like that's not a financial burden on them. I think that's an important argument too, right? Like I think that increasing the opportunities for networking, because not everyone is going to be a professional football player once they graduate. Actually, the NCAA likes to say that 98% of their athletes are going to go pro in something other than their sport. So when potentially 98% of football players are not going to make it to the NFL, what are they going to do? We need to have a better system in place to make sure that they have jobs and careers once they graduate, right? That not everything is focused on football, so that they have opportunities beyond that. And I think the injury part of it is also important, not just the insurance, but to take care of them in a particular way to make sure that they have like fully, at least potentially fully functioning bodies when they graduate, right? Because this wearing down of the body that happens while they're playing is really important and does impact them as they get older, right? So like being more attentive to what is happening on the field, right? So some of these equipment changes that are going on, some of these helmet changes that are happening, I think are also important conversations because then that will have lasting impacts past the 4 or 5 years that they're in college.
Yeah, gotta leave it there, but I do want to tell you guys. Oh, I do have 2 minutes of telling me, so I can get another one in real quick. So remember, we only have 2 minutes. So for people who want to get your work, see your work, be a part of it, talk about where they can find you, what you can do.
Yeah.
What they can do,
So
I should
right
say.
here is my book. It's called Tackling the Everyday: Race and Nation in Big Time College Football. It's published by the University of California Press, so you can find them online, but also anywhere that you buy books, you can probably find it online. If you're interested in my work, because I write for academic outlets, right, a university press for academic journals, but I also write op-eds, and I'm involved with lots of podcasting. So if you're interested in my work just generally, you can find me online at www.traciecanada.com.
All right. Well, Tracie, I do want to thank you for joining us and spending the time with us. Great conversation. Got to bring it back so we could talk a little bit more. I know you got some stuff that's on the horizon, too. Tell us what's
Yeah.
on the horizon, too, because I do want our viewers to have an opportunity to know.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So the first thing is that I'm directing a lab at Duke. That's where I'm a professor now. It's called the Hearts Lab, Health, Ethnography, and Race Through Sports Lab. So take a look at what it is that we're doing. We're also online, and follow us. And then, as I mentioned, I have this upcoming project about concussions and injuries and how that's changing the pipeline, the younger players that are playing. So I have a project that's working now in high schools. So that should be coming out soon.
Well, that's great. Well, we appreciate having you. Certainly come on back and see us again.
Thank you so much.
All righty. Dr. Tracie Canada, anthropologist and author of Tackling the Everyday. Been a pleasure having her here. Listen, we are going to take a quick break, but guess what? We'll have more right after this.
We're gonna start the show right now. This is my favorite part. Ready in 5, 4, 3, 2. Hey, this is Angel, and I am one of the instructors for the in-studio production. Here at BronxNet, we offer classes that can help you elevate, expand, and start your television career. All you have to do is sign up at bronxnet.org/education. For the past 7 years, I have been in various productions, spanning from talk shows, independent films, news reports, art displays, teachings, musical performances, and many more. Ain't that right, Angel? Yeah, you're absolutely right, Angel. There are a lot of creative individuals that we're just waiting to sign up for the class. And if I may, can I also express thank you, Angel. That's all the time we have left. Visit bronxnet.org/education and become a producer by taking the course. The class I offer is also in English, en español y también bilingüe. Nos vemos en la próxima clase.
And welcome back. As the disability community continues to advocate for sustained government funding, it's crucial to recognize the impact of potential budget cuts on both the organizations supporting individuals with disabilities as well as the people they serve. Agencies like the Center for Family Support play a vital role in empowering individuals to lead independent lives through person-centered services, but such cuts could also limit the essential programs. Joining me now is the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for Family Support, Alicia McGrath, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share
Yes.
the efforts.
And I do want our viewers to become a little bit more acquainted with the Center for Family Support for someone who is not so familiar. Give us a little inside view.
I'd be happy to. So we just celebrated our 70th anniversary at the Center for Family Support. We provide services for over 1,000 individuals. We support 1,500 staff, both in New York and New Jersey, and we pride ourselves on providing person-centered supports in the community in our residential programs, and also in pre-vocational programs and supported employment programs, along with self-directed services.
As we talk about disabilities, a lot of concern goes on, particularly coming out of this presidential administration and the things that are happening. As you're looking and doing the day-to-day work, what are your sentiments and what are your concerns?
Where do I start? There's so many
we got a few minutes here, yeah.
And we have a large provider community that we coalesce with, and the concerns really start with the individuals themselves. There are over 130,000 unique individuals that are receiving services right now in the state of New York that is funded by Medicaid. Medicaid is the backbone of the provider services and the way that we're able to deliver services in the community to individuals and families. And that is under extreme threat currently because of the imposed directives of the House Energy and Commerce Committee to find $880 billion. That's a billion. In the budgets to provide savings. And one of the ways that they're looking at providing those savings is by going after Medicaid. And as I mentioned, Medicaid is the backbone of how we provide services in the community to people with disabilities who are legally eligible to receive Medicaid.
Yeah. And as I know, the state budget is still up for discussion, and a lot of things going on across New York State. Any concern on your part about the potential cuts that could be falling that way, particularly in the area of disabilities?
So for the state budget, we did recently get an extension. So we're looking at having a May budget for New York State. There's been a tremendous amount of advocacy. I've been directly involved in going up to Albany to advocate for increases for direct support professional staff and also increases to provide more infrastructure and support for organizations like Center for Family Support. We don't anticipate for this fiscal year, this budget year for New York State, that will have a direct impact in terms of cuts, but that does not mean that those cuts will not come in the future. The way they're going about it is that if they intend to lower the federal match to Medicaid, states would be expected to make up for the losses, which is impossible. Right now, there's $9.1 million in New York State funded through Medicaid for these services, and New York State would not be able to pay for any cuts to federal match in Medicaid funding. So we're all, keeping our ear to the ground, listening for any possible impact it may have for the state budget, but we anticipate that the concern really is what's happening on the federal front.
Yeah. When we look at what's happening on the federal front, there are some examples that I'm sure that you could share and some things that you could share when it comes to those persons who've actually been impacted by funding.
Yes. So I think we're impacted in a number of different ways. There's a lot of fear that's associated with the impact. It would be completely devastating to the disability community and to those organizations and families that support people with disabilities if there were to be any cuts to Medicaid. As I mentioned, Medicaid is how we fund it. So my organization is over 90% funded through Medicaid, and that's how we deliver these very vital services. And these are people who have, a range of disabilities that need these supports, whether it's 24/7 residential programming supports and rehabilitative services, or it's services in the community. And we provide services to families like home care and respite services to families in the communities. So it would be quite devastating. It's unimaginable, actually, that this is even being considered as a possibility. And I've been in this industry for over 30 years, and this is unprecedented to go after Medicaid, because this is how we provide these vital services to our folks with disabilities in the community.
Your insider view on just the feelings and emotions of those in the workplace. I mean, obviously, a lot of, you know, I've often said that you never know until you walk in somebody else's shoes. But I mean, since January, what's it been like? What's the feeling like? Is there this great anxiety that I hear so many people say that's associated with understanding the potential, not just the potential job cuts that we're talking about, but also the potential services that actually, you know, will be lost to a community that stands in need?
So a lot of our individuals that we support in the community don't have any other supports but us. So our staff, ever since the executive order started coming out from day one of the administration, it's been a fear and a tremendous amount of anxiety for staff that we, as I mentioned before, we have 1,500 staff, and the staff are 70% women and women of color who provide these services in the same communities where we provide the supports. We have a huge imprint in the Bronx, but we're in every borough in New York City, also in Westchester. And so they need to support their families. And we're always advocating for a living wage for the staff. So, of course, they're concerned what would happen if I were to lose my job, or somehow that my hours would be impacted, how I'd be able to support my families. And on the family side, the families are, we are fiscal intermediaries for families, helping them navigate budgets to take care of their loved ones. What would happen if they were no longer able to receive these services through Center for Family Support? How would the families sustain themselves? How would people be able to survive in the communities without this level of support? Everyone has to go through an eligibility process to be approved for Medicaid, and these are all folks that have been legally approved for these services because of their determination of disability. So it's incomprehensible to me that this is even a conversation that we're having. But we're also being attacked, at other fronts as well as the Medicaid front, and other federal mandates around diversity, equity, and inclusion, updating our language to make sure that we are not targeted for any grant potential, that if we're using that language. And inclusion itself is really one of our primary guiding values, because we want people with disabilities to be included in the community. We are diverse because we're including people who with disabilities. So, it's been quite traumatic for organizations like ours to have to update our language when it comes to those things, look at potentials of impact of federal funding, and certainly on the Medicaid front. These are people with, in some instances, serious disabilities that need our support.
Yeah. Um, Looking right now at the work that you do, I'm familiar because I have someone up in Westchester County, and they've testified that working with your organization has helped someone to actually live a more independent life. And I think that's part of your goal, right? That there are persons with disabilities who can have the ability to actually navigate themselves into a more independent life.
Thank you for saying that. That makes me smile, because that is exactly what we intend. We provide these habilitative services so people can be more independent, to live a more meaningful life, a more productive life. And certainly, we have every continuum of supports based on what the person's needs are. But always our goal is for people to have, more autonomy, more independence. And we actually had a film produced by one of our individuals. It was called A More Independent Life, as a matter of fact. And he's very proud. And many of our staff and many of the individuals that we support in our community are advocates for themselves. We help train people in advocating for their rights, so that they understand, as a citizen, they have the right to advocate to make sure that these services are not impacted, and that they can continue to live, meaningful, productive, wonderful lives in the community. We have a number of people who live independently, whether it's supportive apartments or what they call ISS apartments, or on their way to living more independently in the community. We help family members with the same thing, helping their family members live more independently in the community. So, and a lot of folks work and or looking for work, and able to feel like they're contributing and giving back. That's definitely one of our values.
Yeah. When you have the role of, I say advocates out there who are really speaking up at a time like this, how powerful is it just having those people in your corner as advocates at a time such as this when, the voices that are out there are really carrying some much needed assistance?
That's a wonderful question. I just returned from a national conference, the ANCOR conference, which is a coalition of provider agencies that support people with intellectual and developmental disabilities across the nation. And what I heard is that people who never advocated before are now advocating because they realize how important, how serious this is. And it's just so heartening to see folks coming out and marching and rallying. There was recently one in Westchester rally in the Valley. 3,000 people showed up. And, I've been up to Albany twice, meeting with the legislators. And when I meet with the legislators, I always bring people that are supported by Center for Family Support so they could hear their stories and hear how CFS and how organizations like ours have really helped them in their life live more independently and how they rely on these services. So hearing from them, the elected officials are very much impressed and very much impacted by the personal stories and the anecdotes that are shared during these advocacy sessions. So it's, we go in mass, we go meet with them one on one, and it really, I think, has made a difference.
For yourself, obviously, hearing these advocates out there doing the work of really speaking up on your behalf, and then knowing the amount of weight that you actually carry at a time such as this, with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of questions as to what the future looks like. What's that like for you? Do you feel like that's a weight that's off of your shoulder?
Um, I feel a sense of allyship, because we have allies in, other advocates, and certainly um, my colleagues and other provider associations as we advocate together. Yes, it definitely lightens the burden, but of course, there's always concern, and we always want to be as proactive as possible for the future to prepare for the future. But I'm very grateful for that, for the advocates, boots on the ground, and certainly for the folks that are continuing the struggle and continuing the family members as well. We've included our board members in our advocacy efforts. Everyone is involved in trying to make a change
Yeah.
in the direction.
When we talk about disability care, I do want to bring in the need about family support services, because there are a lot of people who are saying, listen, when it comes to this, family support services are very crucial and very viable and really affect outcomes for yourself. When you hear that, give me your thoughts, and yeah, I'll let you take it from there.
Yes, I'm very impressed with your knowledge of our services. We started out as a family founded organization, so family members coming together because of lack of resources 70 years ago. And, one of the initial resources that we were able to develop was around respite and home care services for family members. So, this is a core tenet of what we do as an organization. We still continue and are very invested in providing family support services in the community for those members. Particularly, we serve a lot of children, and people always forget about that. We have a lot of children in families that are needing supports and needing respite services, needing home care services, needing community habilitation services. So it's critical that those community-based services continue. We can't go back. Back to the days of institutionalization, and not providing those community supports and not being inclusive.
Yeah, I think one of the things that get lost on people sometimes is when you are providing, these services and disability services, um, this is long term for a lot of people, and it affects people for many people a lifetime. And somewhere along the line, I believe that people lose sight of that and say, hey, well, we might not be able to do as much here, but you'll be okay. You'll be okay. You'll be okay. And the reality is that we're looking around, and more people are having more and more needs, and we're finding that the disability community, those in this community, these numbers are continuing to rise, and it's like the need for services and more impactful services are present. Do you feel like that maybe everybody's not getting it?
There's always room for more education when it comes to what is known as long-term supports and services, and that's exactly what you're referring to, because there's different continuums of support that people will need over their lifetime based on their diagnosis. Of course, we always aim for people to be as independent as possible. There's always going to be some level of support. So it's really up to us to continue to educate folks. And, when I mentioned 130,000 unique lives that are funded, through the Medicaid platform in order to provide services, we're not including people who are waiting to get services. So there's a number, thousands of people who are waiting to get their eligibility approved or waiting to go through the proper processes in order to get approved that are out in the community that will also need those long-term supports and services, for their lifetime.
Yeah. For yourself right now, looking at today's date and seeing where you've come from, looking at what's in front of you right now, do you feel like if things don't go well financially with the funding and stuff like that, just how far do you feel like you'll be set back? Because we hear a lot of people say, I've been affected by these cuts. These cuts have set me back, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. How far of a setback if things really don't go the way that you may anticipate them going?
Yeah, I think that the simplest way to respond to that question is this cannot happen.
Mm,
If we were to, for some reason, be impacted, even a 20% impact of reduction in federal matching of Medicaid funds would be unsustainable for us as an organization. We would not be able to provide those services.
yeah.
So I think people need to understand that this cannot happen, and advocate with, the uh, local, House Republicans and Democrats and everyone just championing the cause of, no cuts to Medicaid. This is the chant that everybody's saying. You cannot touch Medicaid.
Yeah. I mean, the old adage is, can we all get along, right? And hopefully we can get along and everybody can get across the finish line. I know that's a tall order, but I believe that it's possible. I believe that people can really get work to get that, work and get that done. I do want to talk about an aspect of your work that you do with regards to caregivers, right? And sometimes we're not familiar with the fact that some of the work that you do is associated with helping caregivers. And we know that the person who is being treated is the priority and they've got a lot going on and you want to meet that need. But also that caregiver, which is equally as impacted. Share with us a little bit about the services that you provide for those caregivers that they might be able to be encouraged and empowered.
Yeah, well, one of the unique services that we provide is that we're what they call fiscal intermediaries for self-directed supports, and we help over 470 families, help them navigate with the budget that they're given to take care of their child or sibling, in order for them to go through their everyday life and live a meaningful life. And there's a lot of communication in terms of selecting the right services. We also are the employer of record for staff that work with their family members, and we provide supports that way. And then we also provide a lot of education, workshops, and advocacy support for the family members. We have a lot of Facebook groups and other types of social media forums. We provide a lot of community supports for families around recreation, and in the community, as well as just, our general content expertise to help them navigate the system and get the services that they need for their family member.
Yeah. For people who want more information about the work that you do, how do they go about finding that out?
They can certainly go to our website at cfsny.org. They could learn all about our organization, see the wonderful stories and anecdotes about the successes that we've had, and learn about our team. We've had enormous success with our individuals over these past 70 years, and we expect to continue to grow. So I strongly encourage everybody to advocate very strongly to restore Medicaid, to make sure that it's maintained to provide these services.
Have you ever felt this challenge before?
Never. I've never experienced this. As I mentioned, I've been doing this for over 30 years, and started out as a camp counselor at, United Cerebral Palsy, and it was an incredible experience. And then learned to work with Catholic Charities in a home that was where people who were living in Willowbrook, in the Willowbrook class, everybody remembers Geraldo Rivera. You know, that was a Willowbrook class action suit so that people would not be institutionalized, that people could live in the community. And I'm very, very concerned that we're even the possibility of considering institutionalization if we have no other recourse through funding. So we have to get beyond this. We have to move forward and not backwards.
Yeah. I think that looking at this and looking at it from a lens that I've looked at it, I've heard a lot of conversations. I've done interviews with people about budget cuts. I too can say I've never probably been at this place where we were talking about this and looking at cuts here. If anything, we've talked about trying how to strengthen it, but actually the cut is a first, is a first time for somebody. And I just, this is what we do here on the show. For somebody who may not be so familiar as to what Medicaid actually does and the need and the necessity for it, how would you describe it?
Well, I think that Medicaid as a benefit is something that, as I mentioned before, that you have to go through this pretty rigorous eligibility process. And it's insurance that pays for all the vital services. So it helps pay for the staff that you're working with. It helps pay for the home that you're living in, for the food that you're eating, for access to all the health and medical services that you're receiving, all of the medical care that you're receiving in the community. Everything is inclusive, under this Medicaid umbrella that we as an organization help facilitate people getting these services funded through the Medicaid mechanism. So it's absolutely critical that we continue to have these services for everyone. It's how they live.
Yeah. And, when we talk about disability services, a conversation is had that this particular area in itself is one that sometimes gets overlooked, but very much needed and very much necessary. And as you're looking and going and, traversing through this time, what is the message if we could, if you could use your platform right now to speak to those who are watching, those who will see this a little bit later on, what is the message that you would want to send?
I think we have to think about our community at large and thinking about all the people that within our own family members or extended family members that have needed that extra help or have some type of disability, whether it's visible or invisible disability, such as mental health, and how we're going to continue to support people who need that within our communities. There has to be compassion, and we have to make sure that we're um, have an obligation to support those that don't have the same benefits that we do. So I would encourage everyone to also try to help people understand uh, how our disabled community really contributes also to us in terms of our humanities. So it's very important that we are very clear about how we communicate uh, what are the priorities for this disabled community and how and why this is important to us.
Yeah, yeah. In-home is a major service that you provide as well. The impact of in-home service and what that means to you.
So for me, thinking about the families I mentioned that we serve children in homes. So, family members need support in the home with their children through either home care or respite services. And, being able to provide those in-home services is critical. I mean, we are always going to continue to provide those services. We think it's one of the essential services that we do provide in the community. And as a family, people need that support. So if you in some instances, people have more than one disabled child. So we're able to help the family member navigate through life because of the supports that we're able to give them.
Yeah. Ms. McGrath, take me through the office. You're the chief executive officer, right? And I'm sure you get a lot of faces, a lot of questions, a lot of concerns. What does the CEO say to staff and to your clients, particularly at a time like this?
That's a great question. I, first of all, tried to stay calm because there's so much anxiety and so much stress related to everything in the news every day. we're also impacted by what's going on with the volatility in the markets. We do rely on, foundation funding and corporate, support where that may not be available to us, given what's happening right now in the economic landscape. So I try to help people stay calm and also continue to educate people, family members. We do have advocacy sessions with families. We're going to have an educational workshop with families, with boards, and let people know what is precisely happening right now and the timeline of what we can anticipate happening. So it really is a lot of education. And I think that, we have been around for a long time, and our people in our industry have been providing services for a long time. So I think that we will prevail. So I encourage everyone, including staff, families, and board members, to continue to reach out to their congressmen to advocate. We give them the platforms and the forms to reach out and the letters and help them with all the advocacy efforts. And I think when you're involved and you're engaged in advocacy, it helps alleviate some of the anxiety that's happening because you feel like you're actually doing something. And we also rely very much on our provider associations, the New York Alliance, and um, other affiliated organizations like Encore to help us with our advocacy efforts as well.
Yeah. Now, you support people all across New York City, as well as, and that's the 5 boroughs, of course, Westchester County, 24-hour service, I understand.
Yes.
And do you feel as though that 24-hour service could potentially be impacted if these cuts occur?
Yes, of course, I don't want to think about that, that it possibly could be impacted, but of course it could be impacted. We provide 24-hour residential supports. We also have supportive apartments that people get varying degrees of support in their supportive apartment living in the 5 boroughs. And certainly, those supports are absolutely critical for people to get through their day, helping people go on doctor's appointments, helping people make meals, get their medication. There's so many different aspects of the care that we provide in the 24 residential programs, and we do provide services, in Nassau County as well in the community and for families and in Westchester. So, we have a broad reach. We're also in New Jersey. So, and we're experiencing similar issues around advocacy in New Jersey. So, it's something that, as I mentioned before, it's inconceivable to imagine that anything could possibly impact these programs and providing supports for those individuals.
Yeah. Thank you for taking the time to share with us. I think it's important that people understand. You say you don't want to think about it, but I think it's important that my job is to ask the questions to really get the people to think about what could potentially be the outcome, even though we
Yeah.
don't want to see that as an outcome. But thank you for the work that you do. Continue to do the work, and hopefully we'll be able to talk to you later on, and we'll say that everything is all right.
I hope so. Thank you so much for having me.
Doug, great having you. All
Thank you.
righty, we want to let you know we come to the end of our show today. Hope you enjoyed this week's discussion on the Social Justice Forum. If you want to rewatch this week's edition, well, catch Recablecast right here on BronxNet.org. Want to join the conversation, present your point of view? Visit our social media at BronxNet TV. Join us next week. We elevate the discussion and bring further awareness across the globe. I'm your host, Daren Jaime, saying take care and God bless.